October 7th changed everything. But not in the way most Americans think. Yes, Hamas attacked Israel. Yes, Israel responded with unprecedented force. Yes, the region erupted with violence unlike anything we've seen before. But what didn't make the evening news was this. In the first 48 hours after that attack, American military bases from Qatar to Iraq quietly shifted to higher alert levels. Not because of Hamas. Because of Iran. U.S. Central Command activated emergency plans most Americans don't even know exist. Plans for what happens when the regional conflict between Israel and Iran's proxies crosses the nuclear threshold. Plans that assume U.S. forces won't just stand on the sidelines. Right now, as you listen to this, 40,000 American military personnel are stationed within 1,000 miles of potential nuclear targets. They are running early warning systems designed not to buy Washington hours, but minutes, to decide whether a nuclear exchange in the Middle East stays regional or goes global. The question isn't whether America gets pulled into a nuclear crisis between Iran and Israel. The question is how fast, and whether we're ready for decisions that have to be made in less time than it takes to finish your morning coffee. Iran has enough enriched uranium for multiple nuclear weapons. Israel has had nuclear weapons for decades. And US forces are right in the middle. So ask yourself this. When the president gets that 3 a.m. phone call saying nuclear weapons have been used in the Middle East, do you know what happens in your life? Do you understand how fast this crisis reaches American soil? Welcome to Crisis Zone. Today we're not talking about distant hypotheticals. Today we're talking about the nuclear crisis America is already preparing for, whether you know it or not. Geographic reality, America's presence in the Middle East. Let's start with a map most Americans have never seen, where U.S. forces are actually positioned in the Middle East right now. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar hosts 10,000 U.S. personnel and serves as the forward headquarters of U.S. Central Command. It's just 140 miles from Iran's coast. If Iran decides to demonstrate resolve with a nuclear weapon, Al Udeid isn't just a strategic target, it's the most obvious American target in the region. Naval support activity in Bahrain is home to the U.S. Fifth Fleet, which patrols the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Bahrain sits only 120 miles from Iran. The naval base is on an island with no natural protection from blast effects or radioactive fallout. Ain al-Assad Air Base in Iraq houses 2,500 American troops. Since October 7th, it's been attacked multiple times by Iran-backed militias. Iraq shares an 800-mile border with Iran. In a nuclear crisis, Iraq becomes a corridor through which Iranian ground forces could move toward Israel, and U.S. forces at Ain al-Assad are directly in their path. But what makes this more than just a geographic problem is this. These bases are not just military facilities. They are intelligence collection hubs, missile defense nodes, and command centers for operations across the entire region. Losing them doesn't just disrupt American plans, it severs communications altogether. According to recent Pentagon assessments, U.S. forces in the Middle East operate under compressed decision timelines. A ballistic missile launched from Iran reaches Israel in 12 minutes. It reaches U.S. bases in Qatar or Bahrain in 8 minutes. That's not enough time to evacuate. Barely enough time to shelter. Now add the nuclear dimension. Iran doesn't have to strike these bases directly. A nuclear detonation anywhere in the Gulf generates electromagnetic pulse effects that disable communications equipment, radar systems, and command networks. Suddenly U.S. commanders are cut off from Washington, from each other, and from real-time intelligence. This is the scenario that keeps Pentagon planners up at night, not a deliberate strike on U.S. forces, but U.S. troops trapped in the middle of a nuclear exchange they can't escape, and can't fully understand while it's happening. Bottom line, the U.S. military presence in the Middle East was not designed for nuclear war. It was built for regional stability operations, counterterrorism, and power projection. But in a nuclear crisis, these 40,000 Americans become hostages to geography, time zones, and the speed of ballistic missiles. Intelligence and early warning, the 4-minute problem. There's a section in the president's daily brief most Americans have never heard of. missile warning timelines for nuclear-capable states. For Iran, that timeline is shorter than a commercial break. U.S. intelligence can detect an Iranian missile launch within 30 seconds using satellite infrared sensors. Classification and threat assessment take another 60 seconds. Communication to the White House Situation Room adds another 30. That leaves the president with about 2.5 minutes to decide how America will respond to nuclear weapons being used in the Middle East. In those 2.5 minutes, someone has to decide whether this is a demonstration strike, a tactical battlefield weapon, or the opening move in a larger nuclear exchange. In those 2.5 minutes, coordination with Israeli leadership, activation of U.S. missile defenses, and alerts to NATO allies must happen. In those 2.5 minutes, decisions are made that reshape global order. But here's where it gets complicated. U.S. early warning systems are designed to detect launches, not intentions. Intelligence agencies can see a missile in the air, but they can't immediately tell if it's carrying a nuclear warhead, a conventional explosive, or a decoy meant to test American reactions. This creates what intelligence professionals call an interpretation gap. The technical systems work perfectly. Satellites detect the launch, radars track the trajectory, computers calculate impact. But human decision-makers have to guess what it all means while the missile is still in flight. Imagine this scenario. Iran launches a single ballistic missile toward Israeli territory. U.S. sensors detect it instantly. But is it nuclear? Conventional? A test probing American intelligence capabilities? The answer determines whether the U.S. brings its own nuclear forces to readiness, launches interceptors, or simply watches and waits. Guess wrong, and everything changes. Overreact, and America may trigger a nuclear exchange that could have remained conventional. Underreact, and U.S. allies face nuclear attack without the promised defense. This is the 4-minute problem. U.S. intelligence can tell you a missile is coming, but not what happens when it arrives. And in a nuclear crisis, the difference between those two pieces of information is the difference between a regional conflict and a global catastrophe. For U.S. preparedness, this means one thing. Our early warning systems were built for the nuclear threats of the 1970s and 80s, mass launches by superpowers with predictable targeting strategies. They were not optimized for the nuclear threats of the 2020s, small numbers of weapons used by regional powers with unpredictable strategic goals. What happens if nuclear war breaks out in the Middle East? Section 1. The Nuclear Red Line. The U.S. government is currently holding special, Red Team, meetings inside the Pentagon, the White House, and the State Department. The scenario is simple, but terrifying. If Iran develops a nuclear weapon, the Middle East could become a nuclear battlefield. Iran's advance. In early 2025, the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed Iran had enriched uranium up to 90%, the threshold required for nuclear weapons. Satellite imagery revealed a new underground facility at Fordow, protected beyond all known Israeli and U.S. bombing capabilities. Pentagon analysts say this means Iran could have its first warhead ready within 6 months. The U.S. Red Line. The White House has long been explicit. A nuclear-armed Iran is unacceptable. But here's the difference. This is no longer just a diplomatic warning. Last month, U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, conducted an exercise, Noble Shield. The scenario: Iran secretly builds a nuclear warhead, places it on a ballistic missile, and moves it to the Gulf. Exercise results. The exercise showed such a move would force Israel into a preemptive strike. Israel is believed to possess over 200 undeclared nuclear warheads, though it acknowledges none publicly. If Israel believes Iran has a nuclear weapon, every intelligence report in Washington points to one conclusion: Israel will strike. And if Israel strikes, Iran will respond, and U.S. bases will be directly in the line of fire. NATO and U.S. guarantees. The Biden administration has given secret security guarantees to Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait. This means if Iran strikes a U.S. base, Washington will consider full-spectrum retaliation, including the nuclear option. But here's the real question: are U.S. bases secure? Section 2. U.S. military-based defense capabilities. The U.S. has about 45,000 active duty personnel deployed across the Middle East. These aren't just regional garrisons, they are critical nodes in America's global power projection. Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base, hosts 11,000 U.S. personnel, the largest American base in the Middle East. Hub for U.S. aerial refueling operations and strategic bombers. But it's just 190 miles from Iran's missile batteries. Israeli intelligence estimates Iran has over 3,000 short and medium-range ballistic missiles, many capable of striking this base within minutes. Bahrain, 5th Fleet Headquarters, the center of all U.S. naval operations in the Middle East. 7,000 U.S. troops stationed here. Striking this base would instantly cripple U.S. maritime dominance in the Gulf. Iran's navy maintains a large arsenal of shore-based anti-ship missiles, keeping this base under constant threat. Kuwait, Army garrisons. 13,000 U.S. troops stationed. These are armored and mechanized units that can be deployed into Iraq, Iran's border, or the Gulf. But these forces are not hardened. Multiple simultaneous Iranian missile strikes could inflict devastating casualties. Proxy threats in Syria and Iraq. Iran doesn't just have its own missiles. It also has proxies, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. These groups allow Iran to strike U.S. bases without directly crossing the nuclear threshold. In 2020, Iran launched more than 12 ballistic missiles at the US's Ain al-Assad air base in Iraq. U.S. air defenses intercepted few. Only luck and wide dispersal prevented hundreds of American deaths. Pentagon officials later admitted this was the most sophisticated missile attack on U.S. forces in modern history. Defense layers. So how does America plan to defend itself? Patriot PAC-3 batteries to intercept short and medium-range missiles. THAAD systems for longer-range threats. Aegis destroyers patrolling the Gulf to strengthen the missile defense shield. But here's the frightening truth: these systems have never been tested against hundreds of missiles at once. Pentagon's own reports show that every successful interception could still mean several missiles slipping through. A single 10-kiloton warhead hitting a U.S. base means thousands of troops killed instantly, and the collapse of America's global deterrence. Section 3. U.S. Civil Defense Measures. America isn't just preparing to defend its military bases. The Pentagon and State Department are quietly reviving Cold War-style civil defense protocols to protect American civilians in the region. Emergency alert systems. American personnel at bases and embassies now have special notification systems that deliver nuclear strike warnings directly to their smartphones. These were built on lessons learned from Hawaii's 2018 false missile alert. Evacuation plans. The U.S. has secret non-combatant evacuation operations, NEO plans, designed to extract critical personnel from the Middle East within hours. Major airports in the Gulf have been designated as priority evacuation points. Aircraft carriers are positioned to serve as emergency evacuation platforms for embassy staff. Shelters and hardened facilities. New U.S. embassies in the Gulf are built to withstand 30 psi blast pressure. Some American schools in the region even have underground shelters where children can take cover quickly. Domestic preparations. And yes, the U.S. homeland is preparing too. FEMA is deploying radiation monitoring systems with local governments. Public health agencies are stockpiling potassium iodide tablets. And the Department of Homeland Security has revived nuclear fallout drills reminiscent of the 1950s Cold War exercises. Conclusion. This isn't a doomsday scenario from the 1980s. This is something the U.S. government is actively planning for, exercising, and funding right now. Nuclear war in the Middle East would not only reshape U.S. foreign policy, it would directly threaten the survival of American citizens. With warning times measured in minutes, missiles targeting our bases, and shockwaves rippling through financial markets, America cannot afford to be caught asleep on the edge of nuclear war. Until then, stay alert, stay ready, and stay in the safe zone.